Dear friends, dear colleagues, participants at the 8th Academy of Lifelong Learning Advocacy organized by the International Council for Adult Education. I am Roberto Bissio, coordinator of Social Watch. I am very honored to have been invited to join your academy, and I apologize for not being there personally. The right to education is a basic human right of us all. Governments have signed international treaties that commit them to enforce, protect, and promote all human rights, including the right to education. And the Universal Human Rights Declaration has been incorporated not only to international law, but also to the constitutions and the legislation of many of our countries. Yet, if there is no political will and genuine commitment, it is very difficult for citizens to demand the right to education, as well as the rest of the so-called social, economic, and cultural rights. These have been called positive rights because they require governments to do something. Civil and political rights frequently tell governments what they should not do. Do not censor the press, do not put people in jail without a motive, do not torture prisoners. To abstain from doing things has no cost, at least no budgetary cost. But to implement positive rights, such as the right to education, requires to build schools, to hire teachers, to pay them decent salaries. And all of this costs money. Many of us have argued over time that this is not just another expenditure. We build human capital when we educate people, and contrary to other wasteful government expenditures, investing in education and health builds a capital that will have a positive return in the future. Families understand that. Yet decision makers very frequently do not understand, or they face other pressures, other demands. There is no money is the phrase that we often hear as an excuse. And yet, this is false. There is no money only means we have other priorities. The Millennium Development Goals were invented in the year 2000 as an attempt to focus the attention of decision makers in a limited set of what were identified at that time as the most urgent priorities in the poorest countries. Since then, they have guided the activities of the development sector of the United Nations and of the donor community. Yet, the Millennium Development Goals are not without problems. They were created by the donors, they were aimed only at the poorest countries, they were the result of a group of very small experts designing them in a closed room. Actually, Mark Mellor-Brown, who was then administrator of the UNDP, tells the story of how after having finished the MDGs, they came out of the room and they met the director of UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program, and then they said, oh my, we forgot. And they went back to the room to add what is now Goal 7, an environmental goal, to the list. The MDGs expire in 2015 because most of the targets are set to be accomplished by next year. What will happen then with the efforts of the development sector? What will be the guidance? And a worldwide debate has been open around what should be the so-called new development agenda. Actually, two important processes have been opened. One by the governments that decided in the Rio Summit of 2012 to discuss and come out with a set of sustainable development goals, and the other one mainly by UN Secretariat and international agencies, but is now coming into the debate of the General Assembly around the new development agenda to substitute the MDGs. Those two debates probably will somehow merge, and we should have at the end of next year a program, an agenda whether it includes goals or not has not yet been decided, something that should orient what the official development agencies and the intergovernmental organizations are going to do around many important development issues, education, of course, being one of them. In that debate, which is open now, contrary to the initial debate around the MDGs, it is open, not just open to governments, but also to citizens, to experts, to the business community. Some of us would even argue that there is more weight of the business community than that of citizens, but this is, in a way, a parallel debate. The fact is that citizenship organizations, networks have been invited and have been contributing with their views, opinions, commentaries to this debate. In this process, tendencies have been emerging, big views about what this new development agenda should contain. Some people want to just continue what has been the practice of the Millennium Development Goals, and the expression is let's go for the other half, or let's finish the task. Why is that? If you remember, the first goal of the MDGs wanted to reduce extreme poverty by half by the year 2015. Now they say it is time to go for the other half. The agenda is unfinished. Let us just basically continue doing the same thing that we were doing, except let's give us 15 more years till the year 2030 to finish the task. Other people want universal goals. They understand that the MDGs were extremely focused on what is probably the worst situations, but in a way were leaving out of the picture middle-income countries, transition countries, and many people that really need development, whatever however we define it. The social, economic, and cultural rights are still far from being accomplished in most of the world. Poverty and inequalities have been increasing, including in developed countries, and at the same moment, the planetary boundaries, the capacity of the Earth to regenerate itself has been strained to its limit. A new agenda is therefore needed, and that should be universal. That is the second view. Universal, in this case, means that the goals are for all and not just for those in a worse situation. And it also means that every country has an obligation, a duty to implement. The capacities of countries is of course different, and the responsibilities should therefore be different, but that doesn't mean that only some countries have a duty to implement the new development agenda to be defined, whatever that means. That includes, in particular, the notion of goals for the rich. In the current MDGs, the only obligation for the rich is to contribute more official development assistance or to create conditions in the areas of trade, technology transfer, or solving the debt problem. All of this is contained in the Goal 8 of the MDGs, which is the one that has been accomplished the least. But the MDGs doesn't say anything about what developed countries or even middle-income countries should do within their own societies. That should change in the new development paradigm and agenda that is being discussed. As you probably know, the open working group created in Rio to come out with the Sustainable Development Goals has finished its task, and has sent its report to the General Assembly after 1 year debate of 70 countries that were members of that group. So this is as close as we can get so far to having a negotiated consensus document among governments. And these goals are 17 with about 170 targets, each of them in average 10 more specific targets. And one of these goals, the goal 4, is about education. And the very title of the goal expresses different and much more inclusive point of view than that of the MDGs. If you remember, in the Millennium Development Goals, it was only about primary education and about all girls and boys completing primary education. Now, Goal 4 of the Sustainable Development Goals, negotiated among the governments, envisages, and I read, to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Being an academy about lifelong learning, I am sure that you will read the whole document, the goal 4 of the proposed SDGs, with particular attention. And we need to do that because even if this is a document that has been negotiated by the governments, it still has not the status of this is the list of goals that will substitute the MDGs from the 1st of January of 2016 on. There is still 1 more year of discussion among the governments, and in that discussion, this approved SDGs is one important component, but other opinions are still coming in, and the document can still be improved and complemented in ways that are still to be negotiated. It is therefore important for people that have a particular focus on education and on lifelong learning to look at this goal and to see, is this appropriate? Is this what we want? Should we formulate it differently? If it is appropriated as a general goal, what about the specific targets? What is the value of X? Some of the targets do not have a number, but they have an X that says, for example, as in the target 4.6, it says by 2030 ensure that all youth and at least X% of adults, both men and women, achieve literacy and numeracy. What is the value of that X? Is it 100% of adults? Is it 50%? Is that value a global value, or is that to be determined by each country? And if so, what is the discussion process in each country to put a number there to express the commitment to be achieved by the year 2030? That is a major subject of discussion. Other aspect is who is going to fund these efforts. The proposed Sustainable Development Goals, in a way that is consistent with human rights, proposed access to water and sanitation for all, health insurance for all, social security for all, inclusive education for all. How are we going to pay for all this? And actually, this is a debate that the United Nations are also engaging, have only now started, that will continue, will be held in July next year in Addis Ababa, a major world conference on financing for development. Issues on the table of that conference include the traditional issues of foreign debt, of aid, official development assistance, but also the issue of so-called domestic resources, meaning taxes, and who will internally in the country pay for all these goals that are to be met by the year 2030. And finally, partnerships with the private sector, inviting them to collaborate in this effort. There is a major debate going on. The private sector has been exempted from taxation in many, many countries, particularly foreign investment. And many people feel this is unfair and they should be paying their fair share of the development effort. Other people just want the private sector to voluntarily contribute and in that contribution also offer them a seat on the table. Is it reasonable to have big corporations defining policies which will directly or indirectly also affect their operations? Is that the way to go? Many people think that yes, that governments are not capable anymore to deliver social services and therefore the corporate sector should come in. Other people, many of us, think this is too close to corruption to be acceptable as a principle, while, of course, foundations, donors, and the private sector, particularly small and medium enterprises, have an important role to play in development. Big business, big corporations that are already very influential should be looked at very closely before being given more power and responsibilities. These are the debates that all through this year, towards July next year in the Conference on Financing for Development, and towards September of next year, when the discussion about the new development agenda should finish, are on the table. Why is that important for us? After all, whatever this conference decides is going to be a political declaration, is going to be a document expressing the consensus of the governments of the world, but it's not a legally binding mandatory declaration. Nobody is really forced to do whatever the new declaration or the new development agenda or the new goals say that they should do. Why is that important? I think the importance lies precisely in the enormous political weight of such a document. If it is a good document, and I think, for example, that many of the goals and proposals that right now are on the table are actually very good in their formulation, then it legitimizes our demands as citizens. When we go to the government, to the ministries, to politicians, to the decision makers, we are not going to meet them and ask for the moon. We are going to tell them, this is your promise. This is what you solemnly promised us at the highest political level of the world in the Assembly of the United Nations. Now, what have you done with your promises? And this is something that all around the world people understand, that promises should be met and that we have a right as citizens to go and ask the government about what they have done with their solemn commitments and with their promises. And this advocacy work can happen at all levels. It happens at municipal, local level, with the local mayors, with the local authorities. It happens, of course, at national level when the budget is being discussed, when the policies are being discussed. So we can meet with precisely the ministries, the authorities, and ask the questions about the goals that have been committed. We can talk with the press and bring our own findings about how the actual achievements on the ground correspond or not with what has been promised. But it also happens at regional level, and regional organizations have a way of making governments talk and ask each other how they are going, how they are doing, what about the difficulties they are facing. And it should happen also at global level with mechanisms to hold governments accountable, all of them, to the promises that they made. There is a role for citizens there. There is a role for networks that citizens can and should be joining. There is an important opportunity to make our voices heard. It is not an easy task. If it was easy, it probably would not be worthwhile engaging. But it is a most interesting challenge and opportunity for the year to come. And I think a lot is at stake for education and for people with an interest in education in that task. Thank you very much.